Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive.
Mm.
Today, we are going to be talking about the book, The Innovator Solution by Clayton Christensen
And Michael Rayner.
and Michael Rayner. Yeah,
That's right.
I think this one is going to be super interesting to you because you're really interested in business strategy and innovation.
Yep.
And this book is all about how companies can actually thrive,
Right.
like rake in attractive profits
Mm-hmm.
when faced with disruption and commoditization,
Right. So,
which seems counterintuitive.
yeah, it does.
Yeah, right.
How do you make a ton of money when everybody's saying
Yeah,
everything's going down the tubes?
right.
Well, we're going to find out from these guys.
We are the innovator's solution. It really gives us a powerful framework for understanding this.
I love that idea of like a framework.
Right,
Because
yeah.
I feel like so often
Yeah.
in the business world, it's easy to just sort of feel like you're
Just reacting
just reacting or like
Yeah.
you're getting swept away.
by all these different forces.
Yeah.
And I feel like having a framework
Mm-hmm.
is a way to be a little bit more
Proactive.
proactive. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So-
Take control.
Yeah, let's dig into some of the key concepts from this
Mhm.
book. And I know you were particularly interested in the ideas of integration and modularity.
Yeah, absolutely. These are foundational to understanding how industries evolve
Okay.
and where profits migrate over time.
Okay.
So, think of integration as a company controlling, if not all,
Okay.
aspects of a product or a service.
Okay.
A great example is like Apple in the early days,
Okay.
right? Where they designed both the hardware and the software,
Mm.
creating that seamless user experience that was,
Revolutionary at the time.
yeah,
So in a sense, they were kind of their own biggest competitor.
in a way.
They controlled everything.
Right.
And the book argues that this integrated approach is especially powerful
Yeah.
when a product's functionality and reliability are still kind of
When they're not good enough yet? Not good enough?
for customers,
Okay.
right? So
Yeah.
in those early stages of a market,
Mm.
customers really value that integrated everything just works experience
Mhm.
because the technology itself might be clunky
Might-
or unreliable.
Uh,
They're not ready for a bunch of separate pieces
Right.
that they have to figure out themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right.
It's like when the first iPhones came out. Like,
Yeah.
they weren't perfect by any means.
Right.
But, like, that seamless integration of the hardware and software
Right.
was a huge part
Well,
of
not huge.
their appeal.
Yeah.
But hold on a second.
Yeah.
Didn't the book also talk about how this integrated approach
Yes.
can actually lead companies into a trap?
It can.
Like something about commoditization?
Right. It's called the commoditization trap.
Okay.
And it's almost counterintuitive
Okay.
because you see companies
Mm-hmm.
in their drive
Mm-hmm.
to stay ahead of the curve,
Mm-hmm.
they often end up overshooting
Okay.
what their customers actually need and are willing to pay for.
So they make their product too good,
They do in a way, yeah.
at least for like a big chunk of the market.
Or a big chunk, yeah.
And that's when the door swings open for modularity.
That's right.
Okay.
So as the core technology matures
Mm-hmm.
and becomes good enough,
Okay.
customers become less willing to pay a premium
Right.
for that integrated solution.
Makes sense.
Suddenly it makes more sense
Yeah.
for different companies to specialize in different parts
Okay.
of the product.
So instead of one company
Right.
controlling everything, you have a network of specialists,
You do.
each focusing on their own little piece of the puzzle.
Their piece. Yeah.
And the original integrated company that was the king of the hill
Right.
is now competing against a
Yeah.
bunch of like smaller,
More nimble.
more nimble,
Specialists.
specialists who can often do it cheaper.
Often. Yeah. At a lower cost.
Okay.
The book actually lays out 6 steps
Okay.
in this commoditization process.
And it's fascinating to see how this plays out across different industries.
Okay, so walk me through these 6 steps.
Okay.
It sounds like a real slippery slope
It is.
for these integrated companies. Like,
Yeah.
where does it all begin?
It all starts with that shiny new product.
Okay.
Step 1,
Okay.
proprietary,
Mhm.
exciting, attractive profits.
Okay.
But then step 2,
Yeah.
the company gets caught up in that innovation race and overshoots what the market really demands.
Okay.
In step 3,
Right.
the basis of competition shifts.
Okay.
It's no longer about who has the most innovative product,
Mm-hmm.
but who can deliver the good enough solution at the lowest cost.
Right.
Right.
That must be a wake-up call
It is.
for these companies that were like leading the pack.
Big time.
What happens next?
Well, in step 4, driven by that cost pressure and the good enough mentality.
Okay.
The industry starts to move toward modular architectures.
Okay.
This opens the door for the specialists in step 5,
Mm.
and we see the disintegration of the once unified industry.
Okay.
By step 6,
Yeah.
it becomes really tough for companies to differentiate themselves
Why
and maintain those attractive profit margins.
they once enjoyed.
Yeah.
So we've got this fascinating paradox.
We do.
Like integration can be a huge advantage in the early stages,
It can.
but it can also sow the seeds of its own demise
Right?
by paving the way for modularity and commoditization.
That's right.
And as a company,
Yeah.
it seems like being aware of these 6 steps is crucial
It's huge.
if you want to avoid getting caught in that trap.
Yeah, you don't want to be the one left holding the bag
Exactly.
and the music stops.
No.
Yeah.
And
Oh.
the book offers some compelling examples
It does.
of how this is played out
Yeah.
in the real world.
Yeah.
For instance, think back to the early days of like the wireless internet market,
Okay.
like in Europe and North America.
Yeah.
Companies rushed in with this like modular
Modular specialist approach.
specialist approach,
Yeah.
hoping to like capitalize on the technology's potential.
Right.
But it was a flop.
It was a bit of a flop. Yeah, it just didn't
It didn't take off the way people expected.
work.
Yeah.
Why not?
Well, the technology was still too new,
Okay.
too unreliable.
Okay.
Customers weren't ready for a piecemeal solution.
Right.
They wanted a simple,
Mm-hmm.
seamless experience.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they got
Okay.
from companies like Docomo and J-Phone
Yeah.
in Japan.
So these Japanese companies took a more
Integrated approach.
integrated approach.
Even though the prevailing wisdom
Hmm.
in other parts of the world
Yeah.
was leaning towards modularity.
Yeah. Interesting.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So they understood that in those early days,
They did.
it was all about controlling key parts
Right.
of the value chain
Yes.
to make the experience as smooth
As smooth as possible.
and as reliable as possible.
As reliable as possible.
And that's a key insight, I think.
I think so, too.
Like understanding when to integrate.
And when to embrace modularity
Right.
can be the difference between
Huge thing.
success and failure.
Yeah.
Okay, so integration
Yeah.
can be a powerful tool.
Powerful.
But companies need to be mindful
Yeah.
of that commoditization trap.
They do.
They can't just keep adding features
Right.
and expecting to maintain those.
That profit margin.
That profit margins forever.
Right. Yeah.
But what happens when a company's market
Yeah.
starts to head down that commoditization path?
Right.
Is it game over?
Is it game over for them?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
There's
Well.
the Innovator solution offers a really interesting concept called decommoditization. It's a bit of a silver lining in this whole process. As one part of the value chain becomes commoditized, another part becomes ripe for differentiation and profit. Think of it as a game of profit whack-a-mole.
Okay. I'm intrigued. Tell me more about this profit whack-a-mole. Where does the money go? It shifts to those areas where performance is still not good enough for customers. Let me give you an example from the 1990s, the disk drive industry. Margins for 3.5-inch drives, the ones used in desktop PCs, were razor thin. The technology was mature, competition was fierce, and it had become a commodity.
So those bigger drives were essentially good enough.
Exactly. But 2.5-inch drives, the ones used in laptops, were a different story. They were constrained by capacity limitations. Customers wanted more storage, but the technology wasn't quite there yet.
So even though the bigger drives were more advanced in a sense, the smaller drives were where the opportunity was.
Precisely, and that's where the profit was. Companies like IBM, who were struggling in the 3.5-inch market, actually dominated the 2.5-inch market because they were able to differentiate based on their ability to deliver higher capacity in that smaller form factor.
That's a great example. It really highlights how profits can shift from one part of the value chain to another as technology evolves and customer needs change. So if I'm a company in a market that's starting to feel the squeeze of commoditization, I need to be looking for those areas where performance is still lagging behind customer expectations.
You got it. The book calls this the law of conservation of attractive profits. There's a balancing act at play. As one area commoditizes, that profit-making potential migrates to adjacent stages where the product or service is still lacking. It's like squeezing a balloon. The air doesn't disappear, it just moves to another part of the balloon.
I'm starting to get a feel for this law. It seems like a really powerful tool for anticipating industry shifts and spotting new opportunities. So it's not just about being the first to market with a new product. It's about understanding where those not good enough areas are going to emerge and positioning yourself to capitalize on them.
Exactly. And sometimes it requires a completely different way of thinking. A great example is the rise of handheld devices like the BlackBerry. Remember, the device itself was initially quite limited. It wasn't a full-fledged computer.
So in that sense, the device itself was not good enough compared to a desktop PC.
Right. And that limitation actually flipped the script in terms of integration and modularity. Because the BlackBerry's functionality was limited, they needed a custom-designed microprocessor that was specifically tailored to the device's needs. It couldn't just use a general-purpose chip like a desktop computer.
So the profits in this case shifted away from the chip makers who were focused on those high-performance general-purpose processors and toward those who could create these more customized solutions.
Exactly. And that's a really interesting point because it shows how the law of conservation of attractive profits can sometimes defy conventional wisdom. We often think of progress as moving towards greater integration and complexity, but in this case, the limitations of the device actually drove a need for modularity in a specific part of the value chain.
That's a really thought-provoking example. It really underscores the importance of understanding how customer needs and technological limitations can shape the dynamics of an industry. But before we move on, I have to ask, what about brands? It seems like a strong brand can often command a premium, even in a market that's becoming commoditized.
That's a great question and a common misconception. While a strong brand can certainly provide some insulation against commoditization, it's not a magic bullet. Brand power is most effective when it's aligned with the not good enough aspect of the product or service.
So you're saying that a brand can't just slap a fancy logo on a commodity product and expect to maintain high prices?
Exactly. Think about the apparel industry. The brands that hold the most power today are often the retailers, where companies like Abercrombie and Fitch or Gap. Their brand value isn't tied to the specific clothes they sell. Those are often made by anonymous manufacturers, but rather to the shopping experience, the brand identity, and the lifestyle they associate themselves with.
So the not good enough element in this case has shifted from the garment itself to the retail experience.
Precisely. And that's why those retailers have been able to build such powerful brands, even as the clothing manufacturing itself has become largely commoditized. They're addressing a different set of customer needs.
Okay, that's a really helpful way to think about it.
Yeah.
So to build a truly enduring brand, you need to be solving a problem that customers care about, a problem that's still not good enough in their eyes. And your brand needs to be tightly aligned with that solution.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a critical question. How do you build an organization that's capable of tackling these challenges and capitalizing on these shifting profit opportunities? It's not just about having brilliant individuals. It's about the structure and culture of the organization itself.
This is where the innovator's solution gets really tactical, right?
Yeah.
I remember the book talking about something called the RPD framework. Can you refresh my memory on that?
Of course. The RPD framework stands for resources, processes, and values. And the book makes the point that even with the right people in place, the wrong organizational setup can lead to failure. Resources are the most tangible elements: your people, your equipment, your cash.
The stuff you can hire, fire, buy, and sell. But processes are a bit more intangible, right?
Exactly. Processes are how work actually gets done. The routines, the decision-making systems, the flow of information. It's how the company operates on a day-to-day basis. And then there are the values, which are even more deeply embedded in the culture of the organization. Values determine how a company prioritizes decisions, what gets attention, what gets funded, and what gets killed.
So you could have a team of rock stars with all the resources in the world, but if their decision-making processes are slow and their values are misaligned with the innovation they're trying to create, they're doomed to fail.
Precisely. The book gives the example of Panzic, a joint venture between Intel and SAP. They had a world-class team, tons of resources, and a promising product, but they made a series of critical missteps. Their existing processes and values were just not suited for the disruptive market they were targeting.
So how do you avoid that kind of mismatch? How do you make sure you've got the right people, the right structure, the right everything to tackle these not good enough areas and turn them into profitable opportunities?
The Innovator solution offers a really practical framework for thinking about organizational structure. And it all boils down to two key questions. First, how well does this innovation fit with our company's existing processes? And second, how well does it fit with our company's values?
So you're essentially evaluating the innovation on two dimensions: how well it aligns with how you do things and how well it aligns with what you believe in and prioritize.
Exactly. And based on the answers to those two questions, the book suggests 4 different scenarios, each with a recommended organizational structure. If you're dealing with a breakthrough innovation that fits well with your existing processes and values, a heavyweight team might be the ideal structure.
So a heavyweight team is basically a group of experts pulled from different departments who are dedicated to this project.
Exactly. You get the benefit of cross-functional expertise, but with a laser focus on the innovation. And because the innovation aligns with existing processes and values, you can leverage the company's strengths and move quickly. But if the innovation is disruptive and clashes with your existing processes and values, that's when you need to consider a separate autonomous unit.
Because trying to force a disruptive innovation into the existing structure would just stifle it, like trying to
Yeah.
fit a square peg into a round hole.
You got it. The book argues that this is one of the biggest reasons why large companies struggle with disruptive innovation. They try to cram these new ideas into their existing structures, and it just doesn't work. These disruptive innovations often require new processes, new ways of thinking, maybe even a completely different cost structure.
So they suffocate the innovation before it even has a chance to breathe.
Mm-hmm.
But if you give it that space to operate independently with its own processes and values, it can thrive.
Exactly. Think of it like planting a seed. You wouldn't try to grow a delicate flower in the middle of a busy highway. You need to give it the right environment to flourish.
So going back to those not good enough areas we were talking about, if I'm a company that's trying to capitalize on one of those emerging opportunities, how do I decide whether I need a heavyweight team or a separate autonomous unit? Is there a simple rule of thumb?
I'd say the two questions we discussed earlier are a great starting point. Ask yourself, does this innovation require me to solve problems that I've never solved before? And does this innovation challenge the way I traditionally prioritize decisions and allocate resources?
If the answer to either of those questions is yes, then I'm probably dealing with something disruptive, and a heavyweight team or even a separate autonomous unit might be necessary.
Exactly. You need a structure that gives the team the freedom and flexibility to create new processes and make decisions that might seem counterintuitive to the mainstream business.
This is all starting to click for me now. It's about aligning your organizational capabilities with the nature of the innovation. If it's sustaining, building on what you already do, well, optimize your existing processes. If it's disruptive, charting new territory, be prepared to create something entirely new.
And don't forget about the importance of values. They can be one of the biggest roadblocks to disruptive innovation.
Because if a company's values are all about high profit margins and serving the most demanding customers, they're going to struggle to embrace an innovation that targets the low end of the market or operates with lower margins.
Exactly. That's why creating a separate business unit can be so crucial. It gives the disruptive innovation a chance to thrive with its own set of values that align with the unique challenges of that market. A great example is Charles Schwab launching their online brokerage platform as a completely separate entity.
That was a bold move. Didn't that allow them to embrace a lower cost, lower margin business model that would have been completely incompatible with their traditional brokerage operations?
Exactly. It was a classic case of disrupting themselves before someone else did. And ultimately, those new values that they embraced in that separate unit became so powerful that they ended up transforming the entire company.
That's a fantastic illustration of how a disruptive innovation nurtured in the right organizational environment can ultimately reshape an entire industry.
Yeah.
It's not just about creating a new product. It's about creating a new way of thinking and operating.
And that brings us back to the law of conservation of attractive profits. It's not enough to just identify those not good enough areas. You need to build an organization that's capable of capturing the profit that will inevitably migrate there.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So have I had any more thoughts about where I might be seeing those not good enough areas in my own work? You know, one thing that's been bugging me lately
Yeah.
is how we handle customer onboarding.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, it's just such a clunky process with tons of paperwork,
Yeah.
back and forth emails.
Yeah.
It's not good enough, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I know we're losing potential customers because of it.
Right.
Like, they come in, they're all excited, and then they hit this wall,
Right.
and it's just like,
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a great example.
yeah.
And it highlights how the law of conservation of attractive profits can actually play out even within a company.
Okay.
So as your core product or service becomes more standardized,
Right.
more commoditized,
Yeah.
the ability to differentiate and capture those attractive profits often shifts to these
Okay.
less glamorous,
Right.
but essential areas,
Yeah.
like customer service
Mm-hmm.
and onboarding.
You know, I hadn't thought about it that way before,
Yeah,
but it makes perfect sense.
it does.
We put so much energy into
Yeah.
developing the product,
Yeah.
refining our marketing message.
Mm-hmm.
But if the onboarding experience
Yeah.
turns people off,
turns them off right away.
Right from the start,
Right.
all that other effort is wasted.
Totally.
Yeah.
It's like inviting someone to a fantastic party,
Okay.
right?
Mhm.
But then making them wait in line outside
Yeah.
in the rain just to get in.
Right.
You might have the best food, the best music, the best company inside,
Right.
but if that initial experience is a pain,
Mm-hmm.
they might just go home.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm seeing the opportunity here.
Yeah.
If we could nail the onboarding experience,
Yeah.
make it
seamless,
seamless,
even delightful.
even delightful,
Yeah.
we could gain a real competitive advantage.
You could.
Maybe even turn it into a selling point.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Think about companies like Zappos,
Okay.
right?
Mm-hmm.
They built their entire brand
Yeah.
around exceptional customer service.
Yeah.
And it paid off handsomely.
Yeah, it did.
They understood that in a world where products
Right.
are becoming increasingly similar,
Yeah.
the customer experience
Mhm.
is where you can truly stand out.
Okay, but honestly, I'm a little intimidated
Yeah.
by the thought of like
I get it.
overhauling our whole
Yeah.
onboarding process.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
feels like such a
Big undertaking.
big undertaking.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. But remember what we talked about earlier
Okay.
about organizational structure,
Okay.
right?
Uh-huh.
You might not need to upend the entire company to make this happen.
Okay.
It could be as simple as
Yeah.
assembling a dedicated team
Okay.
to focus specifically on this challenge.
So a heavyweight
A
team
heavyweight team, yeah.
with people from different departments,
Absolutely.
not just sales and marketing,
Right.
but also like product development engineering,
Customer support.
customer support.
Operations.
Yeah, people who can see the whole picture
The whole picture.
from all these different
They're
angles.
different angles, yeah.
Okay.
And they can look at the entire customer journey
Mm-hmm.
with fresh eyes
Yeah.
and challenge the assumptions that have become baked in
Right.
to your existing processes.
Right, because we're so used to doing things a certain way
We are.
that we don't even question it anymore.
You don't even see it.
And this is where that ability to unlearn
Yeah.
what made you successful in the past
Unlearn.
becomes so critical.
That's huge.
It's like having the courage to say,
Yeah.
hey, this worked for us before,
Right.
but maybe there's a better way.
A better way now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that phrase, unlearn what made you successful in the past.
That's so powerful.
It's so easy to get stuck in those old ways
It is.
of doing things,
Especially when they brought us success.
especially when they worked,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But in a world that's changing as rapidly as ours,
Yeah.
the ability to adapt
Mm-hmm.
and evolve
It's more important than ever.
more important than ever.
This has been such an eye-opening conversation.
It has.
It's like I've been wearing blinders, and
Yeah.
now I'm finally
To see.
starting to see the full landscape
Yeah,
of opportunities out
Yeah.
there.
that's great.
Not just for my company,
Right.
but like for myself as well.
For you too.
Yeah.
And that's the beauty of a framework like this.
Right. It gives you that new lens
Mhm.
through which to view the world,
Yeah.
make better decisions.
Right. And it's not just about like
It's not.
business strategy.
Right.
It's about understanding
It's about understanding.
forces that shape industries and markets
Right.
over time.
Over time.
Yeah. So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
what's one key takeaway
Sure.
you hope our listener will walk away with?
I'd say the most important thing
Yeah.
is to start seeing the world through the lens
Mm-hmm.
of the law of conservation of attractive profits.
Okay.
Don't just focus on what's currently making money.
Okay.
Look for those areas where performance is not good enough,
Right.
where customer frustration is simmering.
Uh-huh.
That's where the seeds
great.
of future disruption and opportunity.
sown.
Yeah,
Okay.
plant those seeds.
Yeah. And remember,
Yeah.
building a successful business isn't just about
It's not?
having a great product or service.
No,
It's about understanding how all these things,
it is.
like how integration
Yeah.
and modularity
Yeah.
shape industries,
How they
how commoditization and decommoditization
Right.
shift the profit landscape,
Mm-hmm.
how the right organizational structure can make all the difference.
It can.
So as you go about your week,
Yeah.
keep those not good enough areas in mind. Where can you apply these principles
Yeah.
to create real value
Real value.
and capture those profits
And get those profits
that are just waiting to be unlocked?
that are waiting.
That's a great challenge for our listener to ponder.
It is.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
My pleasure.
We'll see you next time.